Family isn't always made of love, but paperwork can be louder. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 38 years old. Last month, my grandmother died. Helen Parker. She was 87. Raised me from age 3 after my parents died in a car accident. She was the only mother I ever really knew. The funeral was at a church in Portland. The family came from 3 states. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. All there to say goodbye to the woman who'd held our family together for decades. I arrived early. I wanted time alone with her before everyone else showed up. I walked into the church and saw my Uncle Thomas standing near the casket. My grandmother's oldest son. 62 years old. Always had opinions about everything. Always needed to be in control. Ethan. His voice was cold. Not grieving. Just cold. Uncle Thomas. You can't be here. I stopped walking. What? You heard me. You can't be here. This is a family service. I am family. Grandma raised me. Grandma felt sorry for you. There's a difference. You're not blood, Ethan. You're adopted. You don't belong here. The words hit me like a physical slap. Not because I didn't know I was adopted. I'd always known. My grandmother told me when I was 5. Explained that my parents died, and she took me in because that's what family does. But hearing my uncle say I wasn't blood, that I didn't belong. At my grandmother's funeral, where I came to grieve the woman who'd saved my life. Uncle Thomas, I loved her, we all loved her. But this service is for the actual family. For people who share her DNA. Not charity cases she took in because she felt guilty. Other family members were arriving. Hearing this, some looked uncomfortable. None spoke up. You need to leave, Ethan. Now. Before you embarrass yourself. I looked at my uncle. At his face showing no emotion except certainty that he was right. That I didn't belong. That adoption was something less than a real family. I left. I walked out of that church. Didn't go to the funeral. Didn't go to the burial. Didn't go to the reception at my uncle's house afterward. I went home to my apartment. Sat alone. Grieving the woman who'd raised me. And grieving the fact that my family had let me be thrown out without saying a word. 3 days later, I got a call from my grandmother's estate lawyer. Margaret Shaw. She'd been handling my grandmother's legal affairs for 20 years. Ethan, I need you to come to my office. Today if possible. It's about your grandmother's estate. I'm not expecting anything from the estate. I know I'm adopted. I know what that means legally. Ethan, please just come. There's something you need to see. Something I just discovered in your adoption records. It changes everything. I drove to her office in downtown Portland. Margaret was waiting. Mid-60s. Professional. She'd known my grandmother for decades. Ethan, sit down. What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process. She pulled out a thick folder. Adoption records from 1986. The year after my parents died. The year my grandmother became my legal guardian. I've been reviewing your grandmother's files. Preparing her estate. I found these adoption records. I'd seen them before when helping your grandmother establish guardianship. But I never looked closely at page 7. No one did. It wasn't relevant at the time. But now, given what's happened, you need to see this. She opened the folder to page 7. A document titled Biological Relationship Disclosure, State of Oregon, 1986. I read it. Then read it again. Then I looked at Margaret. This says my father was Thomas Parker. Born 1962. My grandmother's son. Yes. Uncle Thomas is my biological father? According to this document, yes. Your father, who died in a car accident with your mother, was legally named David Parker. But his birth name was Thomas David Parker. He changed it to avoid confusion with his father, also named Thomas. Your Uncle Thomas. Wait. My father was Uncle Thomas's son? That makes Uncle Thomas my grandfather? No, Ethan. Your father and Uncle Thomas were the same person. Thomas David Parker, born in 1962, had you when he was 24 years old. He died in 1985 when you were 3. Your grandmother adopted you. The records list your biological father as Thomas Parker, but they don't specify which generation. Everyone assumed it meant a different Thomas. But the birth date matches your Uncle Thomas. My head was spinning. You're saying Uncle Thomas is my biological father? The man who threw me out of my grandmother's funeral is my father? Yes. And more than that, this document indicates he knew. He signed a consent form as biological father agreeing to your grandmother's adoption. He was 19 when you were born. Signed over his parental rights. Let his mother raise you as her own son rather than acknowledge you as his son. I stared at that page. At my uncle's signature from 1983. At the form where he'd agreed to let his mother adopt his own child. At the lie that had defined my entire life. Does he know I found this? No. Not yet. But Ethan, there's more. Your grandmother's will. She left specific instructions. She knew this secret. She kept it because Thomas begged her to. He was 19. Had gotten a girl pregnant. Wasn't ready to be a father. Asked his mother to raise you. She agreed on one condition. That when she died, the truth would come out. She wanted you to know who your father really was. So this was planned? She knew this would be revealed after she died? Yes. And she left a letter. For you. Explaining everything. Do you want to read it now? I nodded. Margaret handed me an envelope. Sealed. My name is written in my grandmother's handwriting. I opened it. 5 pages. Written in her careful script. Dated 2 months before she died. The letter started simply. My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've discovered the truth about your father. I'm sorry I kept this from you for 35 years. I kept it because Thomas begged me to. Because he was young and scared and couldn't face being a father. And because I loved you too much to let you grow up knowing your father didn't want you. She explained what happened. Thomas got a girl pregnant when he was 19. The girl, my mother, was 17. They weren't ready for a child. Thomas wanted her to have an abortion. She refused. They had me. Thomas refused to be involved. Refused to even acknowledge I was his. Said he'd deny it if anyone asked. My mother tried to raise me alone. Struggled. I turned to my grandmother for help. My grandmother saw what was happening. Saw her grandbaby being rejected by her own son. I made a decision. She told Thomas that if he signed away his parental rights, she'd raise me as her own. She'd tell everyone I was her late husband's child from an affair. A secret baby she was raising out of love for her dead husband. Thomas agreed immediately. Signed the papers. I walked away. Started his life over. I went to college. Got married to someone else. I had 3 kids who never knew about me. Built a life where I didn't exist. My mother, my biological mother, died in a car accident when I was 3. The official story was that she was my cousin. That my grandmother had been helping raise me. When she died, my grandmother formally adopted me to keep me in the family. But the real story was different. My grandmother adopted me because my father refused to claim me. Because he valued his reputation more than his son. Because he chose comfort over responsibility. The letter continued. My grandmother loved me fiercely. Raised me as her own. Never treated me differently than her other grandchildren. But she'd always felt guilty for keeping the secret. She'd wanted to tell me. But Thomas had begged her not to. Said it would destroy his marriage, his relationship with his other children, his standing in the community. She'd agreed. But on one condition. When she died, the truth would come out. Thomas would have to face what he'd done. And I would finally know why I'd always felt like I didn't quite belong. Because my father had spent 35 years pretending I didn't exist. The letter ended with words that made me cry. Ethan, you are blood. You are my blood through my son, even though he refuses to acknowledge it. You are family. You always were. And I'm sorry I let Thomas convince me that hiding the truth was protecting you. It wasn't protecting you. It was protecting him. Forgive me. I love you. You deserved better. You deserved a father who claimed you. Since Thomas wouldn't, I did. You're my son in every way that matters. Never forget that. I sat in Margaret's office holding that letter. Processing 35 years of lies. 35 years of being treated like the adopted charity case. When I was actually the biological grandson my uncle refused to acknowledge. The son he'd abandoned. The family member he'd spent decades erasing. What happens now? I asked. Now we follow your grandmother's instructions. She's left specific provisions in her will. Provisions that Thomas won't like. Provisions that require you to know the truth before they can be executed. What kind of provisions? Margaret pulled out the will. I started reading. My grandmother had left her estate to be split among her 4 children. Thomas, his sister Mary, his brother Robert, and me. Wait. She listed me as her child? Yes. Adopted child, legally. But in the will, she specifies that you are also her biological grandchild through Thomas. She documents the entire truth. The will itself is a legal declaration of your real parentage. When this will is read to the family, everyone will know. Everyone? His wife? His kids? Yes. Your grandmother was very clear. She said Thomas had 35 years to tell the truth himself. He chose not to. So she's telling it to him. After her death. When he can't stop her. That's going to destroy him. Yes. It probably will. But Ethan, your grandmother was very specific in her letter to me. She said Thomas destroyed you first. Destroyed your chance to know your father. Destroyed your place in the family. Made you grow up feeling like an outsider in your own bloodline. She said it was time he faced consequences for that choice. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. All family members were required to attend. I was listed as a primary beneficiary. Thomas didn't know why. Didn't know I'd be there. Didn't know what was coming. The day of the reading, I arrived at Margaret's office. The conference room was full. Thomas. His wife Patricia. His 3 adult children. My Aunt Mary and Uncle Robert. Various cousins. All the people who'd been at the funeral. All the people who'd heard Thomas throw me out and said nothing. Thomas saw me and his face went red. What is he doing here? Margaret, I told you Ethan isn't family. He doesn't belong to this reading. Margaret's voice was calm. Professional. Mr. Parker, Ethan is listed in your mother's will as a primary beneficiary. He has every legal right to be here. Please sit down so we can begin. Thomas sat. Furious. Glaring at me. His wife looked confused. His children looked uncomfortable. They'd heard stories about the adopted cousin who showed up occasionally. They didn't know why I was reading this. Margaret began. Helen Parker's last will and testament is a detailed document. Before I read the financial provisions, Mrs. Parker requested that I read a personal statement she prepared. This statement contains information that some of you may find difficult to hear. Mrs. Parker was very specific that this statement be read exactly as written, with all family members present. She pulled out a document. I started reading in my grandmother's voice. To my family, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. And it's time for the truth. 35 years ago, my son Thomas got a 17-year-old girl pregnant. He was 19. He refused to be a father. Refused to acknowledge the child. Demanded the girl have an abortion. She refused. She had the baby. A boy. Named Ethan. The room went completely silent. Thomas's face had gone white. His wife was staring at him. His children were frozen. Margaret continued reading. Thomas begged me to help hide his mistake. Begged me to raise Ethan so he could continue his life without the burden of a child he didn't want. I agreed. But only if he signed away all parental rights. He signed. Immediately. Without hesitation. Let his own son be raised as his brother. Let Ethan grow up not knowing his real father. Spent 35 years pretending Ethan didn't exist. Thomas tried to interrupt. This is a lie. Mother was confused. She was old. Margaret held up her hand. Mr. Parker, this statement is dated 2 months before your mother's death. She was evaluated by 2 physicians who certified her mental competency. There are also legal documents supporting everything in this statement. Let me continue. She kept reading. My grandmother's words laid out everything. The pregnancy. Thomas's rejection. The adoption. The agreement to keep it secret. The 35 years of lies. The way Thomas had treated me like an outsider at family gatherings even though I was his biological son. The way he'd thrown me out of her funeral saying I wasn't blood when I was the most direct blood relative she had through him. The statement ended with instructions. Therefore, I'm leaving my estate as follows. To my son Thomas, I leave $1 and this message: you can't abandon your child and expect to inherit from the mother who raised him for you. To my son Ethan, biological grandchild through Thomas and adopted son by choice, I leave 40% of my estate. To my daughter Mary and son Robert, I leave 30% each to be split equally. They treated Ethan as family. Thomas did not. Actions have consequences. Margaret closed the document. Mrs. Parker's estate is valued at $2.4 million. 40% to Ethan is $960,000. 30% to Mary is $720,000. 30% to Robert is $720,000. $1 to Thomas. The room exploded. Thomas's wife was crying. His children were demanding explanations. My Aunt Mary was staring at Thomas in horror. My Uncle Robert looked like he'd been punched. Thomas stood up, pointing at me. This is fraud. He manipulated her. He's not my son. I never. Margaret pulled out another folder. Mr. Parker, here are the adoption records from 1986. Page 7 clearly identifies you as the biological father. Here is your signature on the parental rights termination form. Here is your signature on the adoption consent form. Here are DNA records your mother had done 5 years ago to verify paternity. She wanted to be absolutely certain before writing her will this way. The DNA confirms Ethan is your biological son with 99.9% certainty. Thomas's wife stood up. You have another son? You've had a son this entire time? Patricia, I can explain, you threw him out of your mother's funeral. I was there. You said he wasn't family. You said he was just some adopted kid. He's your son? Thomas's children were standing now. His daughter, Jessica, was crying. Dad, Ethan is our brother? You've had a secret son for 35 years? I was 19. I wasn't ready. Mother offered to raise him. I thought it was best. Best for who? Jessica's voice was shaking. Best for you? You let Grandma raise your son. You let your son grow up thinking he was adopted from outside the family. You threw your own son out of a funeral. His other children were backing toward the door. His wife was gathering her purse. The family was fragmenting in real time. Thomas turned to me. His face was desperate now. Not angry. Desperate. Ethan, I'm sorry. I was young. I made a mistake. I'm sorry I didn't claim you. I'm sorry I pushed you away. But we can fix this. We can have a relationship now. Father and son. It's not too late. I looked at this man. My biological father. The man who'd spent 35 years denying my existence. Who'd thrown me out of my grandmother's funeral 3 weeks ago. Who was only sorry now because everyone knew the truth. Because he'd been caught. Because his comfortable life was falling apart. It is too late, I said quietly. You had 35 years to be my father. You chose not to. You don't get to choose now just because the secret's out. I had a parent. Her name was Helen Parker. She raised me. Loved me. Claimed me. She was my mother in every way that mattered. You were just the person who signed papers so she could do it legally. But I'm your father, no. You're the man who got my mother pregnant and walked away. There's a difference. Thomas's wife walked out. His children followed. My Aunt Mary came over to me. Hugged me. Whispered, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you at the funeral. I knew something was wrong. I should have spoken up. It's okay. It's not okay. But I'm glad Mom finally told the truth. And I'm glad you're getting what you deserve. You were always family to me. Even when Thomas tried to pretend you weren't. Uncle Robert did the same. Apologized for staying silent. Said he'd always wondered why Thomas was so cold to me. Said he wished he'd pushed harder for answers. The reading ended. Thomas sat alone in the conference room. Everyone else had left. His family had abandoned him the way he'd abandoned me. I didn't feel triumphant. Didn't feel victorious. Just tired. Tired of secrets. Tired of lies. Tired of being the family member everyone pretended wasn't really family. The estate settled over the next 3 months. I received $960,000. My Aunt Mary and Uncle Robert received their shares. Thomas received a check for $1, which my grandmother's will specified had to be hand-delivered by Margaret with a note explaining exactly why he was getting it. Thomas tried to contest the will. Hired lawyers. Argued that his mother had been manipulated. That the DNA evidence was fraudulent. That I'd somehow coerced her. Every argument was dismissed. The DNA was legitimate. The adoption records were legitimate. My grandmother's mental competency was documented. The will stood. Thomas's marriage fell apart. His wife filed for divorce. Said she couldn't trust a man who'd hidden a child for 35 years. Who'd abandoned his own son. Who'd lied to her their entire marriage. His children cut contact with him. They reached out to me. Jessica, Thomas's daughter, called me crying. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry Dad did this to you. I'm sorry we didn't know. I'm sorry you grew up feeling like you weren't family. You are family. You're my half-brother. And I'd like to get to know you if you're willing. I was willing. Met with Jessica and her siblings. We talked. We got to know each other. They were good people. Not responsible for their father's choices. We built a relationship. Slowly. Carefully. But genuinely. Thomas reached out several times. Calls. Emails. Letters. All saying the same thing. He was sorry. He wanted a relationship. He wanted to be my father now. Better late than never. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't better late than never. It was too late. He'd had 35 years. He'd chosen comfort over courage every single time. He didn't get to change his mind because the truth came out. Because his life fell apart. Because he lost his inheritance. I used my inheritance carefully. Paid off my student loans. Bought a small house. Set up investments. Donated $100,000 to a foundation that helps young mothers who are raising children alone. In honor of my biological mother who tried to raise me without help. Who died before I could know her. And I set up a scholarship fund at the high school my grandmother attended. The Helen Parker Character Scholarship. For students who show integrity even when it's difficult. Who chooses truth over comfort. Who does the right thing even when no one's watching. Because that's who my grandmother was. She'd kept Thomas's secret for 35 years. But she'd also kept me. Raised me. Loved me. Claimed me when my father wouldn't. And she'd made sure that when she died, the truth would come out. That Thomas would face consequences for abandoning his son. That I would finally know who I really was. I'm 38 years old. I have $960,000 in the bank. A small house. A relationship with my half-siblings who didn't know I existed. And the knowledge that my grandmother loved me enough to protect me from the truth while she was alive and reveal it when she was gone. Thomas Parker is 62 years old. Divorced. Estranged from his children. Living in a one-bedroom apartment because the house went through a divorce. Working a job he hates because his reputation in the community is destroyed. He didn't lose everything because of inheritance. He lost everything because 35 years of lies caught up with him. Because you can't abandon your child, pretend he doesn't exist, throw him out of a funeral, and expect everyone to just forget when the truth comes out. Family isn't always made of love. But paperwork can be louder than lies. My uncle said I wasn't blood. But page 7 of my adoption record said otherwise. And that piece of paper, sitting in a folder for 35 years, was louder than every lie he'd ever told. If this story reminded you that secrets always cost more than truth, share it. Leave a comment about someone who claimed you when others wouldn't. Subscribe to Born for Revenge for stories about people who discovered that DNA doesn't make family, but abandonment destroys it. Remember that the people who say you're not family are usually the ones who failed to be family first. Blood is real, but so is betrayal. And paperwork doesn't lie even when people do for 35 years.